Hi there, Michael Deebs here, and welcome to the Benzo Rehab Projects Channel. If you are coming here from the Benzo Rehab Dungeon Podcast, which I swear will return one day, you likely already know what this channel is mostly about. If you are new to this parasocial relationship, allow me to explain. I recently bought a really old, fucked up house on the opposite side of the country. And you might ask yourself, why did I buy a really old, fucked up house on the opposite side of the country? Well, that requires some background, so bear with me. Back in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was doing a 9/11 every day, my landlord saw the housing market values skyrocketing and decided to sell the house myself and some others were renting. Despite an eviction moratorium being in place and despite having no legal grounds to evict us, selling the house acted as a sort of workaround to forcing us out of the home to make way for the new owners. So the landlord, or rather his property manager lackey, the servant of the landlord's petty fiefdom, gives us notice to move out in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Also at the beginning of the fall holiday season, which is the absolute worst time to try to find housing, pandemic crises aside. What happens next is possibly the most stressful few months of my life, between an emergency trip to Louisiana to drop off my partner and I's dog with their parents because we would no longer have adequate space for a dog her size, finding an apartment when there is basically nothing available, causing me to move about 40 minutes further away from my place of employment, because despite having a supervisor level job with the nearby city's public works department, I couldn't afford to live in the city or any of the cities adjacent to it. And this is because the economy we know it is a cycle, a loop that keeps constricting. A noose even. Over the years, what we consider housing has shifted away from single-family homes on small plots of land to large complexes or suburbs where none of the residents actually own their house and they don't make the rules they are subject to in the housing, being forced to sign a lease on the property owner's terms, and the only land available to any of these residents, if any, is a small playground. Even the very few of my generation, millennials, who are able to land themselves on a home with a bit of land, more often than not, they are only doing so through taking out a loan and therefore are beholden to a financial institution and their rules. And these are the same financial institutions often responsible for the economic uncertainty and turmoil that lead to financial collapses that leave people unable to make their mortgage or rent payments on time. And if the 2008 housing collapse is any indicator, the government bailouts don't come for the families, but rather the cash flows right back into the pockets of the insidious vampire demons responsible for the whole damn mess. And it keeps getting worse, with millennials and zoomers being locked out of the housing market, while more and more homes are being gobbled up by large corporations, new homes being completely unattainable, and more people finding themselves unable to secure any housing but built-for-rent homes or apartment complexes. Those of you who have listened to a single episode of the podcast know that I am not a fan of a certain economic system. You know the one. It favors private property rights over human life. It incentivizes all the worst notions in humans in the form of greed, selfishness, gluttony, and the systemic indifference towards suffering. While many channels doing something similar to what I intend to do will dance around the subject,
the cycle will repeat itself day after day after day. Your life is just going in circles. This is the rat race.
So that's the topic today, is how do we quit the rat race? And
I escaped the rat race early on. I no longer climb the corporate ladder or work a regular 9 to 5.
Often referred to as the rat race. This is where you are in the endless pursuit of change.
But before we can talk about escaping the rat race, before we can talk about your game plan out, we really have to identify what the rat race even is.
I'm not going to address what the problem is by euphemism or genteel speech, and I'm not going to pretend that the elephant in the room isn't named capitalism, and the rat race we all hate being a part of is what we have to do in order to survive under the conditions of capitalism. Like you probably feel in your own life, the hopelessness of my financial future has been a real goddamn bummer, and getting simultaneously fucked by Uncle Sam's Federal Reserve interest rates and every boomer who thinks leeching passive income is their divine right has made me bitter and depressed. A lot of financial snake oil is being sold in the world today. There is no shortage of people telling you to invest in a variety of pyramid schemes, rug pulls, and pump and dumps they've set up to enrich themselves and leave you holding the bag while they walk off with cash-lined pockets. But the reality is that your financial future would be a lot more secure if your basic needs, things like housing, food, and medical care, weren't being withheld by extortionists and highway robbers. Now, I'm not sure I'm the guy to help you with 2 of those 3 things, but I do know a few things about houses. So to answer the question, I bought a really old, fucked up, and dilapidated house on the opposite side of the country because it's basically the only avenue I have towards home ownership and eliminating one of the biggest financial strains I have had in my entire adult life. And it may be your only option too. I say all this to preface that this is going to be a sort of home improvement and project building channel. I'd like to help empower people who feel there is no hope of home ownership in their future to seek alternative means of achieving that goal by demonstrating the repairs and renovations of the home I purchased and the follow-on projects I have planned, all while sharing cost-saving tips and advice on how to plan and execute your own repair and building projects. In a genre of YouTube videos dominated by, at worst, hard-right conservatives prone to bitching and moaning about how kids these days have too many pronouns, or they don't know what a hard day's work is, or at best, people who will tiptoe around or display neutrality in critiquing the material inequalities people are facing today, I'd like to do my part in offering an alternative to the usual voices you hear in these kinds of videos. The house I'm moving into and fixing up has a lot of problems. Some real nightmare issues. A portion of it needs to be completely demolished and rebuilt. What the fuck is going on here? You've got this fucking room over here connected to the then you got this space here, which is this tiny little long room off of like what I can figure is a utility room, and that's all on the back of this kitchen space here. And it's like, why didn't you just, build the whole thing out like this here, and like get rid of that fucking wall, and it really just doesn't make any sense at all. It makes me mad when I have to rebuild that. I gotta start this whole section here is basically being redone. And the parts of it that are comparatively good have some unique little oddities that need to be managed through some creative building solutions. But I'd like to show that despite how insurmountable something like this may seem, you too can do something like this to secure housing for yourself and your loved ones and tackle one of the biggest hurdles to financial security in this hellscape of capitalism we are all forced to endure, all within a hopefully reasonable and attainable budget. In addition to that, when I have the house mostly or completely finished, I intend to work on other projects that will require some other folks with their own other skill sets than my own. For instance, I don't know shit about gardening, I'm just a building guy, but after the food insecurity crisis of the last 2 years, I'd really like to start a garden and a greenhouse to start growing some of my own food. But enough endless rambling, let's lay down some foundational rules for this dang thing. Through this project, I intend to keep a running tally of the cost of all repairs and materials and a rough estimate of the time spent on all the projects I do, and any parts lists and schematic drawings I make, so that you can have a realistic view of what something like this costs, how to build it, where you can save time and money, and how you should spend the extra dollars and effort to avoid long-term problems. And while we're on the subject of money, part of my intent with this channel is to give you information and teach you skills free of charge and without any corporate affiliations or partnerships. If I talk about any specific products or brands in any of the following videos on this channel, I want you to be sure that I have no ulterior motives in what I recommend, but that I am recommending it because I know it will work for you and your own projects. Since this is just a video to introduce you to the project, my next video will probably be about the decision process and where and why I bought my house, in addition to the basic financials of everything related to purchasing the house. I'll probably also show a couple of real trouble areas in the house and how I intend to approach the necessary repairs to those trouble areas, and kind of what I'm doing to prepare myself for beginning work on this entire thing. So stay tuned for some more updates. Thank you for watching, and as always, please remember to take your medicine.